simultaneously was getting her MFA at American University, which is just next door. So she was getting her MFA in dance there and getting an MTS with us, is our coordinator of the dance program. She teaches a one-credit class every semester, and she also brings workshops and organizes the Wesley dancers to do things in chapel. We also have literature, primarily poetry, but also reading courses in literature as theology, primarily led by Dr. Kathleen Henderson Stout, who is herself a poet. You can see a couple of her books down at the bottom of the screen. Waving back is her most recently published chapbook. It came out last year. And the two books above, Incarnality and A Slender Grace, were our books of poems by Rod Jellema, who was our poet in residence for 2 different years, not too long ago. Rod is a faculty emeritus at the University of Maryland in creative writing, and a very fine poet. They both are. I have to say they both are. So we have courses in all of these disciplines, but we don't just have courses in the art disciplines. We actually do have a department called Religion and the Arts. We don't call it a department, we call it a division, but it's the same thing as a department. But in addition to these specialty courses where our students are invited in the course to engage both with the art and with theological reflection on the art form that they're working with, we also have something which I call art across the curriculum. When I used to teach in a state university 20 years ago, we talked about writing across the curriculum. So it didn't matter if you were taking industrial studies or a studio course in the art department or an engineering course, you had to write. You had to write at least one paper every semester. Whatever kind of class you were taking, there had to be some writing. It couldn't just all be fill in the multiple choice tests. I know I could say that. So our model is art across the curriculum. We're not quite there yet, but I will say that all of our biblical studies faculty include art as a requirement of their course. All of our MDiv students have to take a class called Biblical Interpretation Practicum, which comes after Intro to Hebrew Bible and Intro to New Testament. So they have to take Biblical Interpretation Practicum. And they must do an art interpretation of some biblical passage in order to pass that course. It used to be the case that those faculty members would invite me or someone else to come in and talk about art and how to do that, but they've now heard us do it so many times they do it themselves. So our biblical studies faculty own that project. They own the art across the curriculum notion so well that they don't have to call in an expert any more than I need to call in a biblical studies expert when I want to talk about the Bible in an art class. No, we all use the Bible, I hope. But the idea is that we will all use the arts as much as we can in any kind of class. Now, some of our faculty are slower to pick up on this than others. I won't say that it happens in every single class, but that's the vision of the seminary. And in our faculty meetings, people agree to it in principle. Again, I won't say that everybody does it or that everybody does it well, but that's the ethos of the seminary now after 35 years. That's how long that just didn't happen yesterday, but this program has been in place for 35 years, so it's grown incrementally from this experiment that David and Regina did, from something like that into something that's full-blown and that is now unthinkable to not do. It would be unthinkable to stop doing the arts at Wesley Seminary. We have students come to us because there's art on the walls. They tell me, and they tell the admissions department, I decided to come to Wesley because I went around to other seminaries and the walls were so dismal, the hallways were so dismal, and you have art everywhere. It feels so lively. It feels so wonderful to be here. I'm coming here. That is an amazing testament to that conversation that we're trying to foster. Most recently, we have, meaning just in the last year, we've established a certificate in theology and the arts, and I have some of these brochures as well, if you want to take a look at them. It is a way for students who want to focus their studies. At the moment, it's not a standalone program, but it fits within the master's degree program. So if you're doing an MDiv or you're doing an MTS, you can get this certificate in theology and the arts as part of those studies. We are also hoping, and I hope I'm not giving something away that I shouldn't, but we are hoping to have a standalone MA where people could do this, so it's would be a one-year program rather than a 2 or 3 year program. So people who wanted to could come in and do something like this, but it's still in the conversation stage. So don't tell anybody, oh yeah, they have that. What we do have now is an MTS and an MDiv that allow for this certificate. The first person to receive that certificate is Amy Gray, who was our work-study student at the center for the last 2 years and is now interim my assistant while we're looking for a new assistant. I'm actually hoping she'll stay, but I don't know that. She came to us already an artist, and this is a piece that she did for the rededication of our chapel. Our chapel was refurbished in many ways just last year. And for that rededication, she did this astonishing piece way up in the rafters. We have pulleys. We have rafters not unlike these. And we have 4 sets of pulleys now that were part of the refurbishing. So that instead of somebody having to climb up on the cherry picker, our chapel's taller than this one. It's 35 feet at the peak. And so instead of somebody having to go up on tall, shaky ladders or the cherry picker, you can arrange things on the floor and then pull them up by pulleys. And that's how this piece got there. It took 12 people to raise this piece, but it was raised. And what you see here in this picture is the chapel was rearranged for a dance concert. And this picture here is actually at the dedication of the chapel. So you can see that the chapel can be not unlike yours, although we actually have real chairs. We used to have pews when they redid the chapel. We hoped for chairs, and they said, no money. And then the pew restorer took one look at our pews and said, if I try to fix them, I'll break them. You got to buy chairs. So our prayers were answered. Those of us who wanted a more flexible system. We also offer the Doctor of Ministry, which is, in general, one of those short-time residence programs where you come for 2 weeks in January and 2 weeks in May, and the rest of the time you do it by email and internet and all of that. And it's a track system, so you join a particular cohort and take all your classes with that cohort. We are about to start our 4th cohort in arts and theology in January. That will be our 4th time of having that. This is just a picture of graduation. I couldn't figure out what to put for this slide. Lois Wilson was one of our graduates from that program. Lois is a visual artist who works with the HIV/AIDS community as a nurse practitioner. So she's a multiply gifted person in a lot of ways. And she did this show as part of her graduation celebration from the DMIN program. I put this slide in, this really boring looking slide, because none of this happens without paperwork and organization. You have to have invitations and contracts, and this one right here is a diagram of our gallery that I send to all the people who are going to show in the gallery so they know what they're getting into. So it's just really to say that if you're going to have artists in residence, if you're going to have a gallery program, that you have to think through the practical matters. Is there insurance? If there isn't, you've got to tell the artist that there's no insurance for their work that they're lending you. if there's no stipend for the artist in residence, you've got to be upfront about what do they get for being an artist in residence. The best would be for them to get a stipend. There are lots of those practical kinds of matters, and if anybody wants to talk about that afterwards, I have copies of some of those documents to share with people. But what I'd like to do in closing is simply to share one of my favorite poems by that poet in residence that I mentioned earlier, Rod Jellema. I love this poem. It's called "We Used to Grade God's Sunset from the Lost Valley Beach." And I love it particularly because many years ago I lived in Venice Beach in California, right at the edge of the ocean. And at the end of our work days in the studios, I worked for another artist. I was a studio assistant for another artist just 2 blocks from the beach. And at the end of our work days, I and many of the other artists who lived and worked in that area would go out onto the boardwalk and we'd buy a cup of coffee and we would watch the sunset. And so Rod writes, "Why we really watched, we never said. The play of spectral light, but maybe also the coming dark, and the need to trust that the fire dying down before us into Lake Michigan's cold waves would rise again behind us. Our arch and witty critiques covered our failures to say what we saw. The madcap mockery of grading God as though he were a struggling student artist. Cut loose, strip it down, study Matisse and risk something, something unseen. C+, keep trying, that sort of thing. Only hid our fear of his weather howling through the galaxies. We humored a terrible truth, that nature gives us hope only in flashes, split seconds, one at a time, fired in a blaze of beauty. Picking apart those merely actual sunsets, we stumbled into knowing the artist's job, to sort out, then to seize and work an insight until it's transformed into permanence. And God, brushing in for us the business of clouds and sky, really is a hawker of cliches, a sentimental hack as a painter. He means to be. He leaves it to us to catch and revise, to find the forms of how and who in this world we really are and would be, to see how much promise there is on a hurtling planet, swung from a thread of light and saved by nothing but grace. Thank you. So where are we on time? Have I used up all my time, or do we have time for questions? I don't really know. Okay. Questions? Comments? Eye wiping? Yeah. Okay, I guess I've said everything I need to say.
Hi, I'm sorry I was late, so I missed your beginning. Is this a model that can be transferred to somewhere like our institution here? Is that why you're here, or you're just sharing your good news? And do you allow special students visitation, or do you do anything distance?
Yes, to all of that, actually. I really don't think that anything that any school is doing can be totally replicated, because so much does depend on who is around and what can be done. And to the best of my knowledge, there is no other school that does as much as we do. There are schools that do this piece or that piece or the other piece. But as far as I know from my conversations with other people, we're the only school that has such a comprehensive program and that really has art across the curriculum. That's the piece that I'm actually most interested in. I mean, I love the studio classes, and we couldn't do it without them. But I think the ownership by the faculty of the arts is really what we need to be doing in theological education, and we do it incrementally. So I don't think there is any place that can just jump in, even if somebody gave you $3 million.